Hello Planeteers. Today I want to talk to you about attribution and footnotes. So when you're doing an academic paper, footnotes serve one main purpose. They tell the reader where you're getting your information. In a Planet story, that is not why you're doing footnotes. You're doing footnotes so that the editors can see where you're getting your information. But think about it. You don't see footnotes in newspapers, you don't see footnotes in news articles, and you don't see footnotes in the Planet magazine. So the footnotes are there for the editors during the fact checking to see where all of your facts are coming from. The secondary purpose is to help you make sure that you have your facts straight and that you can trace back where you got your facts from. Okay, so those are the footnotes. The way that you tell readers where you got your information is attributions. That's something that goes directly into the story. It's text in the story. So that when you have quotes around a phrase and then it says, said so-and-so, that's an attribution. For a quote, you might have an attribution for a paraphrase. So instead of quoting someone, you would describe what they said, and then you would say, said so-and-so. Or you might do an attribution for a document. So you might describe a statistic, and then you would say, according to, and describe the place where you got the statistic from. Those are all attributions, and attribution is really important for readers because it helps readers understand where your information is coming from. Because a lot of the information that's in your story isn't stuff that you just know, right? You're not necessarily the expert. And so readers want to know, where are you getting your information? Is it from reliable sources? Why should I believe you? And so that's the purpose of attribution. I want to make sure that you don't get those two things confused, right? Because sometimes I see people include footnotes in the stories as if it were a way to tell readers where your information came from, but it's not, because all those footnotes are going to be taken out. I want to take a closer look now with you at some examples of attributions so that you can see how to do those correctly. And then an example of a document that has been footnoted for the Planet magazine so that you can see how to do that correctly. All right, let's dig in. Let's take a look at attributions first. So I see some confusion sometimes about people wondering when they should be attributing information to someone and when they should just be stating something as a fact and not worrying about telling readers where it's coming from. So there are a few clear-cut examples and then some that I'm going to describe a little bit more in detail. First, a quote. Clearly, you want to let people know where a quote came from. And the same thing goes for if you're paraphrasing a quote. So let me show you examples right here. Here's a quote. "That nuclear power plant is at serious risk of collapse," said Cheryl Lamont, a structural engineer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge. So you're clearly stating who said it. You're putting the quote first. Please, usually attributions are better at the end of a sentence. And then you're describing who Cheryl Lamont is and where, like what kind of work Cheryl does and where Cheryl works so that readers have a sense of who's actually talking. So you use a quote when somebody says something that's particularly engaging or strong or interesting, said in a compelling way. Often people say things that aren't really that compelling, but the facts are useful for your story. And in that case, it's much better to use a paraphrase. I always say that you should only quote someone when they say it better than you can say it, right? So that's the purpose of a quote. Something like saying that something's at a serious risk of collapse. It's very dramatic, right? But a paraphrase is useful if somebody conveys some information, but maybe not in such an interesting way. So here's a paraphrase. "The power plant should be shut down within the next year," said Cheryl Lamont, forgot the T, a structural engineer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge. Let's just add that T there right now. Okay. That's fixed. Okay, so you can see that there's no quote marks. but you can still have said, so it's still clear who said this. This is important if you have information in your story that are statements of fact or statements of opinion or statements of judgment, like whether a power plant should be shut down or not. You want to be sure to attribute that to someone. Otherwise, people will think that it's just your opinion. And why should you as a reporter know whether a nuclear power plant should be shut down, right? So attribution in these cases is really important. Then finally, attributing documents. Generally, you don't want to quote from documents. There are some exceptions, but documents can often be pretty boring to quote from, and so paraphrasing is more useful. And so here's something. Half the nation's nuclear power plants are running past the date when they were designed to keep functioning, according to a 2016 report by the Federal Government Accountability Office. So you use according to, that's pretty standard. And then you give people some information about who said it, Federal Government Accountability Office, and where they said it, a 2016 report. You don't need to go into extraordinary detail. You don't need to give the title of the report or the author of the report, right? But you want to give people basic information. Now, I often see reporters struggle with, well, when do I attribute and when do I not? Do I have to attribute every single fact in a story? And the answer is no. If it's things that you've observed directly, you don't need to attribute them. If they're commonly known facts that are not in dispute, you don't need to attribute them. For example, Jay Inslee is the governor of Washington State, right? Washington State is the northwesternmost state in the continental United States. So, you know, or in the 48 lower states. So those kinds of facts don't need to be attributed. But if there are facts that are unusual, facts where you think a reader might wonder, how the heck do they know that? Facts that are in dispute. All those things are things where you want to attribute. You want to let the reader know where you got it from. Let me give you an example. There's broad agreement about how much oil was spilled by the Exxon Valdez when it ran aground in Prince William Sound in Alaska. So that kind of statistic you can find in a number of places. The number's always essentially the same, and so you don't need to attribute it. You can just state it as a fact. It would be like stating the population of the United States, pretty widely agreed on. But the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico during the Deepwater Horizon spill, there's actually a lot of dispute about how much oil was spilled during that. The company has one estimate, the federal government has another, and so in that case, you would, when you cite the number, you would also want to say where the number came from. So that's just an example to help you figure out when you attribute and when you don't. Okay, so attribution. This is how news reporters tell their audience where they got their information. Now we're going to move on to footnoting, which is where you're going to tell your editors where you got your information. So pardon my screen share there. We're going to pop this open. Okay, we're on the first draft assignment for writers. But this footnoting applies to photographers for your captions and for your stories, and for videographers for your script. So the same rules apply. So let's look down here, footnotes. So there's a basic description of what you should be footnoting here. I'm going to let you read this yourself on how you should be providing information. And then here's a list of the things that you should be footnoting. And really, it's every fact. I can't emphasize that enough. Your editors are going to check every fact in your story if your story is published. And if you haven't footnoted it, they're going to come back and pester you to show them where you got your facts. So please take care of it in advance. And then down here is a template. And this template shows you an example of what footnoting looks like. So click this, take a look at it. And as a preview, we're going to take a look at that right now. But please be sure to look at this. But effectively, you're footnoting every fact. Let me say just briefly, what I will do with my stories is before I send a story into an editor, I will go through it and I will highlight every single fact in the story. And then I will check that fact against wherever I got it to make sure that I spelled names correctly, that I have titles correct, all that stuff. So that's how I do it. I just highlight every fact and then check it. So you can certainly use that as a tool. So let's look at the footnoting template as an example. Okay, so this is just a story of mine that I've footnoted. I won't go through every footnote, but here we can see when a series of record-setting rainstorms drenched southern England in early 2014. Okay, and then there's a footnote 1. Where does that take us? Well, it takes us down to the study that contains that information, and then I have told the editors which page that information is on, page 2 and page 4. Please, if you send your editors a link to a paper, tell them what page it's on. Don't make them hunt for it, please. And if they can't get access to the paper, this is a publicly available paper, but if they can't get access to the paper, you need to save that paper, a copy, a PDF of it, and when you turn in your final draft, editors will ask you to put all your supporting documents into a Google Drive folder, and you will need to include the PDF of that paper. And you'll need to give them enough citation information that they know which paper you're talking about. Okay, back to this. So that's giving, okay, then causing more than $500 million in damage. Okay, it's footnoted to show you where the 500 million came from. And you can see here, it's from a paper in Nature Climate Change, study provided in email attachment to editor. Back up here. Yes, it very likely did. They stated in a study published in February. Again, footnote for that study. And then you can get down here even further. Let's look at this. So this is the name of somebody who's quoted. So here's a quote, right? And then there's a footnote for where that quote is. And you can see here that I have right here the name of the file and then the date or the timestamp. So where the editor can find it in that recording so that they don't need to hunt around for it. And then finally, I'm just going to show you this example. Here's the name, U.S. Navy Rear Admiral David Titley, the committee chair and director of the Penn State Center for Solutions to Weather and Climate Risk in University Park, Pennsylvania. Whew! 7. What does the 7 take you? Well, it takes you to the website that has a profile of that person where an editor can check names, titles, all that stuff. So those are the kinds of things that you need to footnote for your editors. And those are the kinds of things that I'm going to be grading on when I look at the completeness of your footnoting. All right, Planet Reporters, you should have a clear picture now of how to do correct attributions and correct footnotes for the Planet. If you have any questions, get in touch with your editor or get in touch with me. I'm looking forward to seeing your stories. Go out there and do some great reporting and writing. Bye.